Hello, everyone. Today is March 18th. This is a meeting of the enhancement subproject of SIG architecture. This is a meeting that will be recorded and available later on the internet. So please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes code of conduct. And in general, just be awesome people. So the first topic that we have on the list, so one for folks that are maybe new to the call, for people who have been here before, please take a moment and add your name to the attendees section. Additionally, if we have anyone who is interested in being a note taker, that would be greatly appreciated. Go ahead and just add your name to the note taker spot. So we want to cover a few things that are related to kind of our workflow. And specifically for the workflow, how do we kind of defer or decrease the burden for people who are submitting enhancements to the release process? So we've been playing around with these ideas for some time, and I think that we have two things that we want to solve. One is understanding what needs to be reviewed and tracked by the enhancements subteam of the release team, as well as what needs to be reviewed within the scope of the production readiness review subproject of SIG architecture. So those are two review requirements, and of course, as you may know, if an enhancement is targeted as implementable and targeted to a release, then it now requires a PRR review, or a production readiness review, rather. So what we would like to do is better understand the workflow for getting that to happen, and then also being able to decide if you don't actually need to buy into that process, right? Is there a lighter weight iteration of that process that still allows you to deliver enhancements without necessarily having the same level of review? So we've been playing around with terms, and I think part of where we're landing is we need to define what the workflow is, and in defining the workflow, there is a requirement to speak the same language, so to speak. So defining what a glossary of terms would look like, so that everyone can come into this process with a clear understanding of expectations and how to be successful. So I think we're roughly all on the same page. Does anyone have questions, comments, concerns about that before we continue? Okay, cool. So we have, I'm digging up the Miro board. It's somewhere in the back scroll. If someone finds it before me, please drop it into the, okay, got it. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen real quick. This is also in the enhancements channel. Oh, Zoom, what are you doing? Okay, that was not great. Okay, so can you see this screen on my, can you see my screen? Okay, cool. So I think that I'd mentioned in the chat that we are not quite done with this diagram, I would say. Let me close some of these things. So where we landed was we played around with a few ideas, and I don't know if they're still on this board. Yes, okay, right. So we had some ideas here, and these are fanciful Miro X's, things we don't want to do. So we had some ideas based on our past experiences, process workflow. The first one that we want to cover, I guess, is core versus non-core. I think that core, language-wise, core has been confusing in the past, and I think that it will mean different things to different people depending on their kind of frame of reference. So I think we came to the conclusion that core is maybe not the right terminology to use when referring to. So my frame of reference for core is pertaining to things that would be landing in the repo, Kubernetes, or things that are under the purview of SIG architecture when related to repository management, right? And someone else may have a different context for that, right? So, and non-core being, the other common terms would be in tree and out of tree, right? So we threw a few ideas together, and the one that we landed with is kind of the smushing together of my idea, John's idea, Tim Hawkins' idea, which led us to this. Using the term release impacting, right? Release impacting is very clear about what's happening there, right? Release impacting determines whether or not an enhancement should be tracked, right? So tracked, yes or no. Release impacting, yes or no, leads to tracked, yes or no. So initially this said non-code, untracked code, and untracked non-code. And this one only said code. So want to call out here that I actually want to do some live edits of this, if that's okay. One, code and non-code, and then two, whether or not a PRR is required. So I think that actually we have two concerns here, right? One is non-code, and Miro, and the other one is code. And I will make this prettier later, but in the tracked pile, we have both code and non-code. And for code, we want that PRR. For, oh no, okay. For code, we want the PRR. For non-code, we want to say that maybe it's
non-code that's release impacting. Would that be like changing the Go version we're using? Like, I mean, what is it? Because release impacting, I thought we decided in the Slack channel was the binaries change basically.
Release impacting is anything that could potentially impact the release. So a good example of that would be like the release cadence kept. It's non-code, but it affects the release boundaries and how we deliver, right? So would that need to go through a PRR review? I removed all of the PRR sections from that kept.
No, of course it wouldn't go through PRR review. But this is why I didn't think release impacting that much, because I think it's confusing. Like, I thought our common ground was that release impacting meant affects the bits in the binaries that we deliver, not process.
My understanding of the common ground was release impacting would determine whether or not it needed to be tracked. Right? Is it a code process change that we want visibility into as the release team or as the enhancements sub-team of the release team? Maybe we should make sure that we're all on the same page before we continue.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was like, let's just call it tracked if it's tracked, but okay.
Well, you don't know that it's tracked until you need something else to tell you that it should be tracked, right?
Right,
so, like,
you need a list of criteria. You need a rubric that defines what things should be tracked and what shouldn't, and then you just call it tracked. You meet this criteria, you call it tracked. Yeah, Dims.
Stephen, can you give me an example of the ones that might not fall under John's definition but will fall under yours?
Sure. So kates.gcr.io cutover, right? Changes to artifacts.kates.io. If we start using that as part of the bits for the release process, that is something that would affect release engineering. That's something that would impact release timelines, but it's not something that necessarily needs a PRR review, right? Infrastructure changes, right? Process changes that would not necessarily be under the purview of production readiness because it is not. So for production readiness, the way I see it is like, this is something that will land on a cluster, and we need to understand fit, right?
Yes.
And then, so I was unsure of how much I wanted to explode this discussion with regards to review, but I actually see three lenses of review, at least three lenses of review, right? Production readiness within the scope of a cluster, release readiness. I don't know what to call it yet, right? But like, maybe this is something that that someone in SIG release should take a look at, right? The cube ADM going out of tree, an example, right? That's something that we would have to coordinate with SIG cluster lifecycle. And if they were to move forward with it, would, without our knowledge, right, would be a little harder to execute on, right? Docker shim, hypercube are examples that like we'd want, like their release impacting, and I would want someone in SIG release to stare at them before executing on, right? And then we have Savitha has been talking about the security reviews as well, right? So where does that go? So I think that there are multiple review opportunities, and I think that not all of them are necessarily relevant to code specifically, if that clarifies.
It does. I totally understand your point is that basically that this flag translates directly to tracked or not tracked, right? And so when it's tracked, there's definitely things that are not code that need to be tracked. That's fine. I'm not going to die on this hill. I just, it was different than my understanding of the conclusion of the conversation we had on Slack, but it was a long and winding conversation.
200.
And so I suspect, I just don't know what other people walked away with. So Lori's not here and Tim's not here.
So can you see my cursor?
And she was involved a little bit, but like, so I don't know who else or whether this is going to meet other people's expectations.
Can you see my cursor?
What's that?
Moving around. Can you see my cursor moving around? Okay, Bob
Yes,
says
yes, yes.
Right. So I think that like this path is the one that we care about first and foremost, because this is the path that exists. Right. This is
Yes.
this is like, if you're submitting an enhancement today and you hit certain buttons and you like set certain metadata, this is the expected path.
Yes.
Right. So I think we need to hit this path and make sure the code represents that path as well as this path. Right. The point of hitting this first, is it release impacting, or do people think it's release impacting? Right. Will immediately tell us, okay, well, we can route you out. We can route you out, and we just need to figure out what this process means to us. This is probably another template, or this is a or this is an explosion of multiple templates, right?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
If I could just ask a quick question, if I could just ask a quick question, because I hear John saying this is not what I thought it was going to be, but I'm wondering, is there something that's a concern that you would have with it being different than whatever you kind of perceive?
No, that's kind of what. Thank you. That was what I was about to say. Is like it's actually not that important.
Okay.
So I'm okay with it, but we do need to make sure that others that were involved in the discussion are also okay with it. But I'm fine.
So question. So Steven, what are you trying to do here, in the sense that, like, are you trying to figure out what class of KEPs do not need PRR reviews? Is that what is the objective of this?
Absolutely, right. So it's two things, right? And the first is what class of KEPs need to be tracked, right? From the perspective of the enhancement sub team of the release team, first and foremost. When they start tracking things, that will determine whether or not it needs a PRR review, right? So, but before we even get to the PRR step, we want to know if the thing should be tracked. And I think that we're trying to decide on like the label, the language to put that under, and we landed on release impacted, yes or no, or true or false.
Yeah, and Dims, the thing is, right, once something's tracked, there's a bunch of rules that come into play, but there's also a bunch of benefits. Well, I don't know, there's some benefits to get, like it ends up in release notes, and so there's tracking of how it gets documented, and so people may want to elect to be part of that process. I know, Kirsten, I'm just people may want to be part of that process to get those benefits. But again, they may not fall under the criteria of what they're required to use the process. So we're sort of like trying to streamline the process. One is you find the things that need full process, right? And maybe there's going to be security reviews at some point too. Then you find the things that maybe don't necessarily qualify and require full process, but want it. And then there's a bunch of things that don't require full process. Now, it's not that hard to put NA in all the PRR questions, but as we add more types of review, if we have to, or as, we just may want different process flows for different types of changes. And the sooner we can tell people that, the lighter weight it can be for them.
It's also memorializing it. I think that there's a lot of just general confusion, and there's no like source of truth of like, this is what it is. Like I hear that a lot, or I see a lot of confusion. And instead of, having to ask individuals, is this? I think also what Lori's trying to do through the flow chart and through sort of memorializing all of this is to have the source of truth so that everybody can go to this thing and clearly like take in mind whatever their enhancement is or whatever their idea is and know what they need to do as best as possible. It doesn't mean there won't be questions, but to sort of take out the squishiness of it and then the constant sort of debate and just nail down in this release, this is what it is. And we all have this understanding that can be found in this place. And we all are working on the same page to take that variability out of it. If I talk about the greater sort of purpose of the conversation and everything else that we're doing.
And then from my perspective, as we start to like clean up and improve the tools and put more enforcement mechanisms in place, it becomes a question of like, well, what does the code look like to support that, right? So currently, like the release cadence cap is an example of like something that I want to flip to implementable, and I can't now because the pre-submits block it because it requires a PRR review that isn't required. So
just put NAs. Just put NAs in all of it, Stephen. I'll approve it.
Yeah, I'm just so since we're talking about lightweight stuff, like can John go and add a label that says PRR review not required, and then immediately the verification will pass? Would that be a mechanism that you would consider, or are you talking about like text inside the YAML itself that says the PRR is not required for this?
It should be text within the PRR itself, because within the KEP metadata itself, because as we clean up the KEP metadata, and we're pretty clean now, actually. I think we've had a bunch of cleanups in the past, and I think the repo's just about where it needs to be, outside of backfilling some fields that are.
So if you're talking about in the metadata itself.
Let me make the point. So the reason behind this is like as we are concerning ourselves more and more with the metadata and structuring receipts, generating manifests for all of this stuff, like it needs to be it needs to be not a GitHub query. It needs to be in the content itself.
I got it, Stephen. I know a little bit, so I got that part. So then the question is like, it is self-reported in the sense that the PRR author will add that thing in the metadata, right? Or somebody will make that person do it. So that will still, John can still go and say, no, that's not allowed. Like for the KEP that you're writing, it falls under this other category, or it qualifies this thing, so you need to flip it back on, right?
So right now, as it stands, our validations will cause your pre-submits to fail.
I know that. So I'm saying that
right.
if somebody says, if we have like 10 things in there and they switch off all 9 and say, and only one of them, I want like Jordan to take an API review. I don't want anything else in this set of things that, right? And then
so it becomes, John, so the next.
Let me finish. So John comes and says, no, this needs a PRR review, right? Like, so
it needs a PRR review, period. Like as the rules have been set as of 121, everything requires a PRR review.
Yeah,
so
we're not talking about today. We're talking about in the future.
Tims, hang on, because we're all like, we're running out of time in the meeting and we haven't covered everything. The second part of that we're concerned with right now is getting people to route out of the process, right? We need another piece of information to help them get routed out of the process so that John doesn't have to come to the thing and go, oh, a PRR review is not required for this, right? Instead, you flip that switch, right? So that switch that you're talking about, that's what we want to enable, but we need a common language to do it.
Yeah, if I can interject.
Let me make one more point, and then I'll shut up. You are looking all of this from the release lens, right? Like, what does release team want to do? What does release team need? If you step outside and think of like end users who are going to download this stuff and who have to have some faith in like the production readiness of those bits, right? Like, step outside from that point of view. If you look in, like, I'm getting a set of bits from Kubernetes folks. Is it production ready, right? So is that something that you can factor into this equation rather than just
absolutely?
Looking at it from the
I want to clarify that I want to clarify that we're not only looking at this from the lens of the release team or the people who are working on this directly. This feedback is coming from like things that have been shipped across time, issues and PRs that have been opened, asking about like, well, what do we do with in tree versus out of tree? How's this data presented? So we're considering
how many labels do you have right now? It's only release tracking and release not tracking.
It's yes, no, and out of tree. And we're saying that yes, no, out of tree is the wrong way to slice it, because they're combining multiple concerns. Like, do I want to track it as a part of the release team or enhancement sub team or PRR reviewers, or is it important to track in general and it just happens to be out of tree, right? Mm-hmm. Those labels don't actually answer that question today. So finding the answer to like figuring out the right way to essentially saying out of tree like combines too many concerns, right? And for someone who is not in the project, they don't know what out of tree or care what out of tree means, right? So one, finding the right language that allows us to indicate to people like, this is important, this is why it's important, right? And these are the kind of review steps that it's gone under.
There's one thing that just to kind of get to what I think Dims is talking about was a concern of mine of, are we creating a process where the author is kind of deciding all of this and somehow slips things through without other people deciding? And one thing that Navarun and Anna and I were talking about was, and we brought this up also, and I think Stephen agrees, is that we still want the SIGs to own these enhancements and these caps. So we don't want authors to unilaterally be deciding things. And we're going to have to figure out, and I think that this is something that was in progress in the conversation, was figure out a way to still have SIGs be the gatekeeper. Because the enhancement team can't know. Like I can guess based on my experience, but I can't know. And the SIGs need to be that arbiter, that blocker to say, no, this actually needs a PRR. This doesn't need a PRR. So I'm not just relying on, in good faith, but relying on this one single author, but the SIG. So we still want the SIGs to be the owners and gatekeepers of these caps. And I hope that I see some nodding. So I'm hoping that like makes some sense there. And maybe we need to reflect that better in the chart so that that's clear. But that was a conversation that we also had recently.
I think we have that. I think, hold on. I think we have that right now, right? So we have two things. One, the fact that all of the directories that proposals are added to are under the purview of the SIG, right? So like you cannot approve something unless it has been approved by the SIG. So that's the first piece. The second concern that I believe, Kirsten, you added a review to the receipts kept was because John's concern as well around too many directories and like this should just be flat, keep it simple. An approval of a receipt is saying that everyone has approved it. So I responded to your review and suggested that when we add receipts, we instead add the receipts to the SIG's directory. So they're the ones opting in, right? They're the ones opting into the idea that the proposal should land. Then within the receipts directory or the releases, release whatever, and manifest that actually aggregates all of those receipts, that is the thing that we control with the tool.
Yes.
So that way the SIGs do the opt-in and then we aggregate.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the main thing is we need to make sure that the criteria is clear for the SIG chairs and TLs about when something.
Did John freeze for everyone else? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Originally, but that's fine if we take it to be a little bit broader, but we still need that rubric for them to say, does it change the point? It pretty much needs PRR.
Yeah. So John, you hung in, I believe, like the critical part of your explanation, and like we kind of have a bit of a cliffhanger because we are at time. So I would say like let's jump on enhancements on Slack and keep the conversation going, and we will catch you at the next one. All right.
And what's the status of lengthening this meeting? We talked about making it longer.
Let's take it to Slack as well.
All right. Bye.
All right. Later, everyone.